quality management and clinical trials in Ireland, with an emphasis on good clinical practice. She's an experienced clinical trials auditor and travels to various sites worldwide to ensure that trials are conducted to GCP. And she's constantly in touch with leading authorities in her field of responsibility. So I'll hand you across to Vanessa, and just so you know, we're going to have a break for food, and probably in about 20 minutes or so. We sandwiches tonight. We normally have our hot platters, but the kitchen is out of order here at the moment, so you'll have to excuse that. And then we'll take a break after that. We'll have questions, and we'll aim to finish up, I suppose, at kind of maybe 8:30, 20 to 9. All right, and just another thing as well, I have Jackie Gorman from the Atlantic Corridor is here today, and she's just going to have, if anybody wants to talk about it, it's an initiative in the Midlands for the promotion of science and engineering. It's an event that's coming up on the 25th of February. So Jackie will just say a few words at the end, if you can hand out our brochures as well if anybody's interested. So I'll hand you across to Vanessa. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Judith. Do I need to speak into this? Or can I just use this mic? I don't need this, do I? Good evening, everyone. I'd like to thank Judith and the Alchemist Cafe for inviting me to speak about cosmetics, functional foods, and medicinal products and how they are tested and regulated in Ireland. Now, it's such a huge topic. I just felt I'll do a whistle-stop tour of how things are done in this country and rather leave it open to the questions and answers section, because I'm sure you might all have individual questions that you'd like to ask me, especially about cosmetics. I cannot mention any brand names. My lawyer told me not to mention. I will mention cosmetics by type, maybe, but I can't mention any brand names or answer any questions about specific named cosmetics. I'll just tell you a bit about myself. I work for a company called Shandon Clinical Trials, which is based in Cork, and we perform clinical trials on cosmetics, on medicinal products, and on functional foods. What a clinical trial is, for anyone who doesn't know, that is a study or a research project that is performed to prove the efficacy of either a medicinal product, a cosmetic, or a functional food, and to prove that it's safe to use. Clinical trials are performed both before and after a drug goes onto the market. We have 4 different types of clinical trials. Phase 1, which is the first time the product, if it's a drug, is taken by a human. It's the first stage after it's come out of the laboratory. Those are the type of studies that you'll always read the headlines about. These are what's called the first into man studies. They're normally performed in a hospital environment. At Shandon Clinic, we don't do first into man studies because we're a clinic rather than a hospital environment. You need emergency resuscitation facilities, and what happened in Parktown North in England a couple of years ago with those healthy volunteers who took immunosuppressants and they had very bad side effects. That was what's called a first into man study. You also have what are called equivalence studies, which Shandon Clinic perform a lot of. These are performed on healthy volunteers, and what those studies are, for example, when the patent runs off on a drug, every other pharmaceutical company are entitled to make their own version of the original drug. So, for example, ibuprofen was the original drug, and then Nurofen is one of the many copy versions of that drug. So we will do studies to prove that the Nurofen is equivalent to the ibuprofen before it goes onto the market. So that's, those are all phase 1 studies. Phase 2 are performed on patients. This is to prove that the drug is actually effective and working. Phase 2 studies are also done in the hospital. Phase 3 are also performed on patients for whom the drug is indicated, and that's in even larger groups. And finally, phase 4 studies, which are performed after the drug is already on the market. The reason why clinical research is still going on after the drug is already on the market is because sometimes it takes 1,000 or 1,000,000 people to take the drug before a side effect becomes known. If it's a very rare side effect, you need a lot of people taking the medication before it comes up. And that's what happens during phase 4. It's looking at adverse events and side effects over long-term use. So that's clinical trials. In Ireland, the regulatory body that governs medicinal products and functional, not functional foods, but medicinal products homeopathic products, herbal products, and medical devices is the Irish Medicines Board. The role of the Irish Medicines Board, which is a fairly stringent regulatory body, is to ensure that the safety, health, and well-being of both clinical trial subjects as well as patients is paramount. And they perform their role by, number one, controlling any clinical research that is done in this country, and number two, monitoring the safety profile of drugs that are already on the market. So what happens is once a drug is on the market, the marketing authorization holder, the pharmaceutical company that owns the drug, has to send reports to the Irish Medicines Board of any side effects worldwide, and then the Irish Medicines Board makes a decision if that drug needs to be withdrawn temporarily, if the side effect profile is too high, or withdrawn permanently, or if the patient information leaflet needs to be changed slightly, or the dose needs to be changed. So that's one of the many roles of the Irish Medicines Board. For example, St. John's wort, which was a product that was sold by Nature's Way, a natural product that's used for depression. A lot of people were on this a natural remedy for depression, but when their doctors asked them were they taking any medication, they never mentioned it because it was a natural product, and it actually interferes with warfarin, a drug that is used to thin the blood and prevent clotting. So there were a lot of patients who then had bleeding, and that's why the Irish Medicines Board has taken St. John's wort off the market. It's still on the market in various other countries in Europe and can be obtained on the internet. But that's one of the roles of the Irish Medicines Board, is to regulate these side effects and interactions between different drugs. So we have to answer to the Irish Medicines Board, and all the studies that we perform have to be approved by the Irish Medicines Board before we start the study, and approved by an ethics committee. Ethics committees are boards that are independently constituted to ensure that the safety, health, and well-being of both patients and healthy volunteers are not exploited. Ethics committees came into being after the Second World War, when Joseph Mengele, who was infamous for all the human experimentation he performed on Jewish concentration camp victims, and after the Nuremberg trials, ethics committees came into being as a result of the World Health Organization. So there are a number of these ethics committees that are in place in Ireland, all approved by the Irish Medicines Board, and they're made up of lay people as well as medical and legal and scientific people. So ethics committees have to approve every single study that goes on in Ireland. As regards cosmetics, the cosmetic industry in Ireland is currently regulated by the Department of Health and Children. But in November of last year, the EU Commission got together, and a directive after many years was put together on cosmetic regulation, and every single country will be taking that directive into law by 2013, and then the Irish Medicines Board will once again, as the regulator, be in charge of cosmetics, which will be a huge change for the cosmetic industry, where at the moment, with the exception of the label claims on cosmetics, it's not very highly regulated at all. I just want to explain what a cosmetic is, because there's a big difference between what we think a cosmetic is and what the regulators will consider a cosmetic. A cosmetic is something that is applied externally to the body. It cannot be a tablet or a capsule. It is applied to the skin or the hair or the nails, but it can also be used on the teeth. So in other words, toothpaste is a cosmetic, mouthwash is a cosmetic, but anything swallowed or digested is not considered a cosmetic. So when we talk in regulatory terms of a cosmetic, shampoos are cosmetics, body creams, not just makeup, but anything that's applied externally. However, as soon as you make a medical claim, it is no longer a cosmetic, it is a medicine, even if it has no effect. If you make a medical claim, it is no longer a cosmetic. So that is why when you look at any of the marketing, cosmetic marketing, they're very careful what they say. I mean, popular terminology would be may improve the appearance of wrinkles. That doesn't mean anything. They can't say, for example, will improve the appearance of wrinkles. That's immediately a medical, medical claim. They can't say smooths out the skin and anything that makes a definite claim. It's a medicinal claim that then means they have to do controlled clinical trials on the cosmetic. And which is regulated once again by the Irish Medicines Board, and it's very, very expensive to perform clinical trials. So a lot of cosmetic companies don't go down that route. However, we do a lot of cosmetic trials, not as many as medical trials because medical trials are compulsory, but a lot of companies are moving towards doing clinical trials on their cosmetics. The Infisil range, that's a Procter & Gamble range, we did all that testing in Shandon Clinic. Those are hypoallergenic products. They do deodorants and face washes and shower gels and that sort of thing for people with sensitive skin. But they do make medical claims, so they had to do clinical trials. So it depends on the type of claim. Currently, the regulations that govern cosmetics are all to do with their labeling of the product. You can put anything in a jar as long as they're known ingredients, and you can put it on the market. You just have to apply to the Department of Health for a marketing authorization. But what is regulated at the moment is the labeling. You have to list every single ingredient. In the past, you could just say includes perfume or includes aroma, but now if their ingredients are more than 0.001% of the total, you actually have to list every single ingredient. There's also a new regulation that you have to, it's called best by use date. It's a little, so once it's opened, people know how long they can use the product for. That's a new regulation. So at the moment, the only regulation regarding cosmetics is the labeling. What has to be on the label? The manufacturer has to be on the label so that the consumer can contact the person who owns the product if they have any problem with the product. So that's what currently governs cosmetics. Of course, the marketing of cosmetics in magazines and on television is a different matter altogether. That is governed by the Advertising Standards Authority of Ireland, and there are certain things that they can and cannot say in their advertising, and they're very careful about what they do say. I'm sure you've all seen very often they'll have a little asterisk, and 5 out of 15 women, or 12 out of 15 women noticed an improvement in the appearance of wrinkles. You have to be very, very careful when you read these things, because they never list the statistical significance of the sample size that they've used. And I can tell you, we had samples of well over 600 people just to test one product on the Infisil range. You need a very large group of people to have a statistically significant result. So a lot of this evidence that's in hard copy in magazines, it's only anecdotal. That doesn't mean the product doesn't work. I feel that the placebo effect is very powerful. If you want to pay 200 euros for cream and you feel it works and you can afford it, I say go for it, because if it makes you feel better and you feel you look better, then, but a lot of the information that's put on hard copy is not statistically significant at all. It might just have been by chance that the 12 out of 15 had noticed an improvement on. Also, the studies aren't blinded. A blind study is when you give 2 different products. One might be placebo, just cream with nothing in it, and one is the real cream. And neither the patient or the study subject or the person who's assessing their skin knows what they've used. And then they assess it over time, and then they break the code afterwards. Oh, you were actually on the real product and your skin didn't improve. You were actually on the pretend product and your skin did improve. So if the study is not blinded, you have no way of seeing that everything is actually a real result and not a result by bias or by chance. So that might all change with the Irish Medicines Board regulating from 2013. I just want to speak a bit as well about adverse event or side effect monitoring. The Irish Medicines Board is the regulator in Ireland for side effect monitoring. It's very important if anybody ever has a bad side effect that they let their GP know, their family doctor know, because there's a reporting system in Ireland, and the manufacturer of any cosmetic or any drug has a responsibility to send all these side effect reports to the Irish Medicines Board, and unless they're getting them from both the consumer and from doctors and from literature searchers, they're never going to have a full picture of how these products are faring out in the marketplace. So it's very important that people notify if they have a bad reaction to their family doctor, so that they can see whether these products are actually having side effects. Functional foods, I'll just mention something briefly about functional foods. At Shandon Clinic, we've only done a few studies on functional foods. What a functional food is, it's a food claiming to have a health promoting or disease preventing property. For example, I'm sure you've all heard probiotics bandied around. Probiotics and prebiotics are the new superfoods, like these yogurts, I can't mention any brand names, but these yogurts that have acidophilus and all of that in them, those would be considered functional foods because they're making a claim, but their claim is about reducing the risk factors associated with the disease. They don't talk about reducing the disease per se. So at the moment, they're okay. They're not a medicinal product. They're on the sort of edge. They're a functional food. Now, there's a lot to say about them. There are a lot of them that are reducing the cancer risk factors. Probiotics are, mostly bacteria, lactobacillus and other types of bacteria. What happens is when you ingest them, you increase the friendly bacteria in your gut. Prebiotics, which is the new buzzword, your body never takes them in, but once they get into your gut, they kind of get all the other bacteria going, and then the other bacteria grow much, in vast numbers, the happy bacteria, so to say. That's very in basic terms. So those are functional foods. Other things are cranberry juice, blueberries are another big thing. All these antioxidant foods, they are what are considered functional groups. They're governed by the Food Safety Authority of Ireland at the moment. So if a company like Glanbia or Kerry Foods, they come to us with a new functional food, we'll do clinical trials on that against a placebo or against a comparator product, and the results of our studies then get sent to the Food Safety Authority in Europe, and they agree that the product can then be marketed. But before it can be marketed, it then comes back to Ireland, and the Food Safety Authority of Ireland has the final say before that particular functional food can make a label claim and sell itself as a functional food. So, that's how they're governed. They're not governed by the Irish Medicines Board. What else can I say? Oh, animal testing. I'm sure a lot of you will have questions about animal testing. The first regulation against or controlling testing of both medicinal products and cosmetics in animals in Europe actually goes as far back as 1876. There have been 700 amendments to that regulation up as far as 2002. As the regulations currently stand in Ireland, it's the policy in Ireland not to license any product where the product has been tested on animals or the active ingredient has been tested on animals where there was another method available. So if, for example, another country outside Ireland wants to market a product, especially a cosmetic, that has been tested on animals where there was another method that could have been used to test it, for example, in the laboratory or in a test tube, then in Ireland they will not market that product. Experiments on animals is illegal in Ireland. Regulators, no experimental activity on cosmetics or on medicinal products is legal in Ireland. In September 2004, a new European law on experimentation in animals came into being, and it's quite a large EU directive, but the core points are that there's a ban of marketing any products or ingredients in Europe where the products have been, or the active ingredients have been tested on animals, where there was another method available. And as of 2009, there's now a ban on any animal testing of ingredients within the EU. So no EU countries, as of the end of last year, can test ingredients on animals. And also the banning of marketing any products within the EU where the products and the ingredients have been tested on animals, even if there isn't an alternative available. So it's getting better all the time, well, from my point of view anyway, but there's still some of it, going on. That's a very quick whistle-stop tour of clinical trials and animal testing and cosmetic testing and functional foods. I'm just trying to think what I've left out. It's such a big topic. I think I'd rather leave it open to questions and answers because there's, I'm sure I'd be able to answer most of your questions. And I don't want to go into all the regulations. It's a very highly regulated industry. I can't tell you the dates of every regulation off the top of my head because I just have them all on my laptop, but it's a very highly regulated industry. And the other thing I wanted to say about the Irish Medicines Board was the Irish Medicines Board came into being in 1996. It was previously the National Drugs Advisory Board, the NDAB, and Ireland has always been far more stringent than the rest of Europe as regards controlling clinical trials. So in fact, before 2004, when it became law within the EU for all clinical trials to be approved before you went ahead and did your research project, the Irish Medicines Board were already doing that. So we were the only country in the EU when Shandon Clinic was in its early years where we actually had to get approval for phase 1 healthy volunteer studies. Now, it didn't make us at all competitive because no pharmaceutical companies wanted to have to go through the Irish Medicines Board when, if they went to the UK, they could just get ethics committee approval and go ahead with their research, and we had to get all the bells and whistles and jump through the hoops of the Irish Medicines Board. But when it became law in the whole of the EU, Ireland was way ahead because we've been doing that for years. So all the companies that were doing research in Ireland were well used to getting clinical trial approval, and now we're very competitive. And of course, it's much more, we haven't touched wood, with the exception of a while back with the Austin Dara crisis in Dublin. That's one of the reasons as well that Ireland was always so stringent as a result of, they had a healthy volunteer incident here in Dublin. Ireland is very proactive in protecting its healthy volunteers from being exploited and from taking unnecessary risks. So that's it, Judith, anyway, hopefully.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. That was excellent. We might as well continue and do some questions. I don't know if we'll need the mic.
No,
I don't think we will. Does anybody have questions? I'm just going to sit down and kind of go for that. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, one question. Who makes up the Irish Medicine Board?
The Irish Medicines Board, I can't tell you the number, but there are a lot of departments. There are pharmacists. When we send in an application to do a clinical trial, we have to send it in triplicate, one to the medical assessors who look at the medical design of the study, one to the pharmaceutical assessors who look at all the pharmacy data on the drug that we're testing or the cosmetic that we're testing, and then they also have people who look at the ethical scientific side of it. So they have a whole department for homeopathy. Their website's imb.ie, and you'll see it's fairly comprehensive. It's a very, very big organization. So they also have what's called a GCP Inspectorate, which is good clinical practice. And they have a GMP Inspectorate, which is good manufacturing practice. The GMP inspectors go around to the actual manufacturing sites like Pfizer and in Ringaskiddy and Cork and Shearing Plough and check that all the products are being manufactured. They do these inspections on a regular basis. All the manufacturers in Ireland have to have a GMP license, which is a good manufacturing license, and that is issued by the Irish Medicines Board every 2 years. So they have an inspectorate, which is about 20 people. Then the good clinical practice will come round to places like Shandon Clinic, also St James's Hospital, all the hospitals who do patient studies, and they do inspections there as well to check that all the studies are in compliance with the regulations. So there are a number of different departments at the Irish Medicines Board. It's a very, very big originally, when it was the National Drugs Advisory Board, you had to get approval from the Department of Health and approval from the National Drugs Advisory Board. And now the Department of Health, that side is melded with the National Drugs Advisory Board to form the Irish Medicines Board. So it's a very big organisation. From the day you send in your application, they have up to 6 weeks to approve it or to say no, redesign it, or they didn't think you had enough pharmaceutical information on the drug, or it's because the EU is now regulated. Every country has the same guidelines with a little bit of flexibility for each. Like in Ireland, it's the Irish Medicines Board. In England, it's the MHRA, which is the Medicines Health Regulatory Agency. Every country has their individual board. Every country has put the EU Clinical Trials Directive into law. In Ireland, it's the Irish Clinical Trials Act, and it's a statutory instrument, so it's a big, so every country has put the directive into law. We work to the directive, but we're also aware of the law. There's slight, subtle differences between countries, but not very big. And in Ireland, the ethics committees have to be approved. So you can't just willy-nilly put together 12 people, a lawyer, a teacher, a doctor, and say, we'll get this as our ethics committee and we'll get them to approve our study. You have to be an approved, I think there's 6 approved ethics committees. We use the one at the Cork University Hospital, their ethics committee. They have to be approved by the Irish Medicines Board first, that they're made up with a good range of disciplines and people who will understand the actual study as well. The Irish Medicines Board are great if you ever want to send them a question. They're really good about fielding questions from, just from consumers or from anyone.
You mentioned functional foods. I'm just wondering regarding supplements and vitamins and minerals. Does that come up at all?
That would also, if it's making a medicinal claim, then it goes as a medicine, a pharmaceutical, and it would have to go through the Irish Medicines Board. More and more supplements and vitamins are considered a pharmaceutical. It'd be very hard to get under, to bypass the Irish Medicines Board. I know we have entry criteria for all our patients and for any healthy volunteers we use on a study, and if they're on any vitamins, they're excluded. So I think we haven't done any, we did some studies on ginseng, but we haven't done any studies on, and ginseng was considered it was making medicinal claims, so it was considered a medicine. So you see, a lot of vitamins have been on the market already, so they're not having this big hurdle of having to have clinical trials because they're on the market before the regulations became. But I think anyone coming up with a new product, we did evening primrose oil studies for dysmenorrhea that all had to have clinical trial approval. It was treated as a medicine. So I think if anyone's coming up with a new supplement, it's very expensive. We've done a lot of studies on seaweed extracts, and I don't think very often these people, they know it works. These companies come up and they have all the anecdotal evidence, and we know it works, but you have to be able to statistically prove, and you need such a large sample size. And a lot of these companies, which come from a very good place and they have a very good idea and a very good product, they don't have the financial backing, especially when it's a peri-med, it's a supplement type thing. They don't have the money behind them to perform the clinical trials, which is a pity in one way. But on the other side, we did a study a long time ago now on a cream, a herbal cream for psoriasis in children. It wasn't actually in Ireland. We had a second clinic in Manchester at the time, and it was, it had no pharmaceutical ingredients, and everybody really wanted to use it, and we used it on 100 children, and it was working so well. The medical assessors who were monitoring the study said that it was just working so well. They just didn't trust it didn't have steroid in it, because steroids are commonly used for psoriasis, and obviously parents don't want to give their children steroids in the long term. So we sent a jar of it away to be analyzed. It was full of steroid. Well, he went to prison, but you have to be very careful. You've got one side, the positive benefits of not taking a pharmaceutical, rather taking a supplement or something that's herbal, and then the fact that you get these charlatans who just, so that's, the Irish Medicines Board have to err on the side of caution.
What's the difference when you see an ad between scientifically proven and clinically proven, and what's stopping this charlatan with this psoriasis just changing his label and saying, listen, it might be beneficial?
Yeah, well, you if he said it might be beneficial, that's fine. But the thing is, he'd have to. That's why he's in prison, because he didn't list steroid as an ingredient, and he had put steroid in it. Clinically proven is, well, not in the scientific sense, but how it's used is more anecdotal evidence, subjective evidence. Scientifically proven means that if they're using the term correctly, is that there's a statistically significant effect.
And do they know the mechanism? Because you see toothpaste ads and they go, Sensodyne, sorry, but no beef.
Yeah.
But what point does really, really clever toothpaste and cosmetics become medicines, because they're just
we do a lot of dental studies. The Cork University Hospital have a dental clinical research department as well, but we do a lot of overflow studies on toothpaste, and at the moment we haven't had to get clinical trial approval because they haven't made any medicinal claims, that the toothpaste studies that we've done. But if they are, then that have to be considered a medicine. But if they say nay, or it's all to do with the advertising gurus that they get. The Advertising Standard Authority is very, very stringent. They have to be very careful with what they say. You just have to learn to read between the lines. You've seen how small the little asterisk and the text is at the bottom of the page, where it says, 9 out of 10 women in big writing have, felt that the wrinkles were diminished, and at the bottom you'll say of a sample size of, or whatever. Clinically proven just means it was in a clinical setting, as far as I can tell, and it doesn't mean it's statistically significant at all. But I'd be very interested to see what happens over the next few years with the Irish Medicines Board regulating.
So if that guy with the cream had just decided, I'm not going to make the medicinal claim, I'm just going to sell it, he could have legally sold it?
He could have. And unless somebody had tried to test it, but up until now. Well, I don't know exactly how the directive is just out. It's 150 pages, and I haven't finished reading it. But it's fairly stringent. You have to list every single ingredient, just as the Irish Medicines Board are currently spot testing and testing drugs. They'll be testing cosmetics, and they'll go around to manufacturing sites. Sites that manufacture cosmetics will probably have to have a good manufacturing practice license, a GMP license, just as a factory that manufactures pharmaceutical products, and rightly so, because if things aren't manufactured, hygienically, you could have any amount of bacteria or something growing in a product, and because you're not ingesting most of these things, you might swallow a small bit of toothpaste or mouthwash, but they're only going on your skin. It's all a risk. It's risk assessed. Even, the Irish Medicines Board can't visit every site all the time. We've been inspected only 3 times in the 16 years I've been in Shandon Clinic. It's to do with the volume of studies you do, the type of studies you do. We don't do high-risk studies. Most of our studies are what are called over-the-counter medications, new generics of drugs that are on the paracetamol, Panadol, and well-established antibiotics. We're well known to the Irish Medicines Board. We're the only clinical trials unit in Ireland. Now, there are a lot of clinical trials going on in Ireland in hospitals, and consultants are running their own trials, and family doctors are running their own trials, but we're the only actual organization that's what we do. So we're the only one there's one in Belfast as well. So we don't get, we have to have a GMP license, even though we don't manufacture drugs, because we store them. It's very, very stringent, which means we had somebody from the Gcp Inspectorate coming to see our pharmacy to check the drugs we are actually using for the clinical trials, and the cosmetics are being kept in an environment where the temperature is monitored, everything's locked away so that nobody can get at it, and so it's very, very, very regulated. But cosmetics, you're quite right, unless somebody from the inspectorate spot checks a cosmetic, you know, they could put something into it. But that's very rare now. I'm not, you know, scaremongering, and I'm not here to promote the Irish Medicines Board either. They're great, but you know, they are the regulatory body.
Functional food like probiotics that you mentioned, or omega-3, they've undergone a number of clinical trials, haven't they? And
They do.
do they have health claim, or in that case, like that's been actually demonstrated, in that case they could be considered as medicine?
Well, what they can do is, if the clinical trials show something, they can make a health claim, but as soon as they make a medicinal claim, they will then have to retest it and go through the whole Irish Medicines Board route. So even when they can make a health claim, as a result of statistically significant results, sometimes they don't go down that route if they feel they don't have the money, or it's normally comes, or the other thing is you need so much pharmaceutical data on your product. So it just depends how new a product it is.
Have some evidence, but not enough.
Not enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Homeopathy is a new department for the Irish Medicines Board as well, and I'm very interested to see how that progresses, because homeopathic evidence is largely anecdotal. I won't say it doesn't work, because I've used it myself and I used it on my horse and it worked, but I don't know whether it's the one-on-one. I don't know if it's the one-on-one consultation that makes you feel better, or if it's my scientific brain says one thing and my heart says another. But they do have an department, and I'm not too sure. We've never done clinical trials, and I don't know whether that's ever going to happen in the homeopathy line. It is, yeah.
But that's the only one really. I've done a lot of things about depression, and it's been actually demonstrated to a certain dose it actually treat depression and things like that, but we haven't done anything about that so far.
Well, when we did study on ginseng, as I mentioned a while ago, it took about 18 months for the company just to get enough data together to satisfy the Irish Medicines Board to give us the approval to proceed with the trial. And it's only ginseng. I mean, it's in tea and everything, but they err on the side of caution. So that's the way they operate.
Yes. Everything you're saying, what does it mean for people who are seeing at home making soap for their local farmers market and things like that?
Oh, you can make soap for your local farmers market. That's fine.
It doesn't have to be tested. It doesn't.
No, it's fine. You're not making any label claims. I presume it just smells nice, and no, that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
What would be the average size of your panel when you're carrying out a
study
cosmetic test?
When we did the cosmetics testing for the Infasil range, the correct way, the statistically correct way, you'd have to do what's called a power calculation, first of all, to work out what your sample size needs to be. And the statistician does that. That's based on what you call a 5% significant level, which means that there's only a 5% chance that the result you get is based on chance rather than on a real effect. And you need to also make sure that you're comparing your product with either a placebo, a blank, or with a product that's already on the market, and that you need to be randomized, that either your panel, your subjects, receive both products, or else you have to make sure that your panel is homogeneous. They all have exactly the same characteristics, and then half gets one and half gets another, and that it's blinded. The people who are taking the product or using the product, and the medical investigator doesn't know what product they're using. You have to make sure you're removing all bias. But the other thing that's very important with cosmetics is you need to make sure you have what are called atopic people in your study population. Atopic people are those type of people who are hypoallergenic. My husband in the corner, they're normally asthmatics. They react to Persil and to the wrong soap powder being used, and that's normally about 5% of the population, and you want to pick that up in your sample. So what you have to do is normally recruit 4 atopics and ensure you have at least 5% who are atopic, so that you can say, well, my sample size is representative of the population at large out on the street. We had 500 people when we were testing a soap, and that included 5% atopics. And there probably would have been some others who didn't know they were atopics, but we screened for atopic people. And that was it depends on how big a difference you think you will be able to show between the two products. If you think it'll be a big difference, you need a smaller group. And if you think that the difference will be very slight, then you need a larger group. For phase 1 equivalence studies that we do in healthy volunteers, traditionally it's only 24. They're very small groups. Phase 1, you're looking at small groups. You get onto phase 2, you might have a population of 60 patients. Phase 3, because you want to show smaller and smaller differences. So that's the way it works. I mean, with anti-wrinkle creams and these kind of things, if you just want to give anecdotal or subjective evidence, then you can try it on 20 women and that's fine. But as long as you just realize that it's subjective and anecdotal, it's not necessarily. I mean, clinically proven just means it's in a clinical setting. That's all that they were given the product to use over 5 days and they kind of controlled it. It doesn't mean it's significant. And the other thing I wanted to mention about pricing of cosmetics, I know it's slightly off the topic, but people often say, well, why is that moisturizer, one of the new, I won't mention the brand name, but one of the new products, Penelope Cruz is advertising it. It's got retinol in and all these things. It's quite expensive compared to the other creams that are similar on the market. There's normally a reason for that, and it's not just marketing or it's because it's a luxurious product. It's because they want to make as much money as they can before the patent runs off on the active ingredient. So it's for example, a Porsche car will have some part of its engine will be a really good part, and that's why the car costs so much. And then eventually all cars will have that same part, and then the value will go down. So this new product that Penelope Cruz has been advertising is quite expensive at the moment, but eventually the price will go down because the patent will run off and they've made their money back, and other creams will, once the patents run off, they can use that same ingredient in their products. So initially there's a big push. From the time an ingredient is discovered in the laboratory, they straight away sign for a patent, and that's their patent and they own it. But it might take them 15 years before they eventually get that product onto the market, and patent is normally only 20 years. So they have 5 years to make back the money for 15 years of research. So 300, 400, 500 million they have to make back. So that's why initially these products cost quite a lot.
Do you know which ingredient it is?
I know when I see the name, is it AHA? I don't know. The tube's purple and white, and anyway. But it is scientifically and statistically proven to work, that active ingredient. But it's quite expensive at the moment. But I mean, the product that has got a lot of statistical significance and results is that Boots number 7, Protect and Perfect, that they had the queues down the street in England when that has been, and that's very reasonably priced. They've got a whole range. I can't remember the name. See, we don't work with scientific names. We work with brand names. So I have a cosmetic dictionary on my desk because you can't remember all the scientific names. So, but some things are genuinely, scientifically proven, and then there's a rush on them, and they're not necessarily that expensive. I mean, if you go to a dermatologist, he'll just say, "Oh, use aqueous BP cream and Vaseline," but that doesn't really help. because they're not really interested in any of the fine ingredients. I mean, aqueous BP is great; you'll never be allergic to it, but it's oily as hell, and just sits on your skin. But you can wash your face with it. It's great for moving stage makeup, but that's about all. So.
Vanessa, I think we'll take a break.
Okay.